lesbian, Satan, Mary Shelley, and more. Today we're talking about the history of vampires, blah 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 blah. Now if you've been following me for a while, you know that vampires, like dragons and witches, have existed all over the world since seemingly the dawn of time. The Aborigines of Australia have the Yarramayahu, a little creature that hangs around in trees, and when you fall asleep under the tree, it jumps down, drinks your blood, then hops back into the tree. The Maya have Camazotz, the death bat, a gigantic bat that flies over you, jumps on your shoulders, drinks your blood, then heads out. This is all to say, for any one culture to say, we created vampires, you didn't. Vampires created vampires, we just told their stories. Now, as far as we can tell, the word vampire comes from the word vampir, and the word vampir, we think, comes from the Slavic word upir. Upir were blood-drinking witches, which you'll notice in a lot of societies where there are creatures that are humanoid that drink blood, they're all witches. And if you're wondering where the idea of crosses and holy water hurting vampires come from, it's very simple. When the church heard this folklore about the Ubir and the vampire and the vampires, they're like, no, that stuff is devil stuff, and if it's devil stuff, you can defeat it with godly stuff, hence holy water and crosses. But truthfully, neither of the two were ever actually connected by folklore. Moving on to Dracula, the first big vampire, except he wasn't even the first vampire book, he wasn't even the first vampire character. To our knowledge, the first ever vampire book was called The Vampire, and it was written by John Polidori, who, get this, was the doctor to Lord Byron, who was at the house that night telling a story about vampires to a young girl named Mary Shelley, who that night also created the idea for Frankenstein. That's right, the first ever idea that inspired Dracula happened the same night that we got the creation of Frankenstein. And we wouldn't get Bram Stoker's Dracula for another 80 years, okay? So after The Vampire, the next big book that came out was called Carmilla, and if you're a lesbian, you definitely know it. And if you're a lesbian and you haven't read Carmilla, what's wrong with you? It's like the first big lesbian book ever published. Now, many things had a huge inspiration on the creation of Dracula, but one of the biggest is Carmilla. He pretty much stole the entire story, added a few other creations and ideas, and the idea of Vlad the Impaler being the direct inspiration for Dracula is not true. He had already been finished with most of the book by the time he even heard about Vlad the Impaler from one of his friends, and so he changed the name and changed the location, but the idea of Vlad the Impaler directly influencing the creation of Dracula is not there. And lastly, if we're going to talk about vampires, we have to talk about the most influential vampire movie of all time, Universal Studios, the Universal Monster franchise's Dracula with Bela Lugosi. Yes, I know Nosferatu came first, but Nosferatu was not as popular as you might think it was. Dracula, though, was. It was a worldwide phenomenon. And of course, because this is just how fate works, Dracula the movie would come out the same year as Frankenstein the movie. Also because, if you didn't know this,